voice. And here ends the reading of God's holy word.
Thank you, Quentin. In my junior year of high school, I went to Florida for my spring break. My friend Erin came with me and with my parents, and the two of us did all the things that two Midwestern kids do when they spend their spring break in a condominium retirement community. We burned to a crisp while giggling loudly at the pool and being shushed. We drank ginger ale, and we studied for the ACTs. We were wild. As the trip came to a close, Erin and I dreaded going home. This was in part because leaving the sunshine for a still very dreary month of March in Chicago was a real bummer. But we also knew that we had this massive test coming up. We had studied all week for the ACT, and soon we'd have to face the music. My stomach was in knots. Now, maybe standardized tests don't sound scary to everyone. Maybe it even sounds a little bit trite that this was such an enormous worry for me. But in that season of my life, it felt like a tremendously terrifying thing. Can't I just stay and drink ginger ale and go to bed at a reasonable hour like every other retired 17-year-old? We've all been there. Now, maybe you haven't been in a 50 and older community for your high school spring break, but we've all faced that uncomfortable moment, that anticipation when something good is coming to an end and something challenging is around the corner. For so long, it was with that spirit that I approached the book of Revelation. I had avoided this entire book of the Bible because of my own dread, and quite honestly, I find it intimidating. It's a book about the apocalypse, after all. I was convinced for many years this was a book about the end of the world as we know it. And side note, if you are now humming a tune by a band called REM, you too are old enough to join me at that condo in Florida. Revelation is about the end of the world as the author knew it. And he knew a world in which terror reigned, and violence ruled, and human authority attempted to control what is holy. Rob Bell summarizes the circumstances of the original audience nicely. In his book, Love Wins, Bell writes, Revelation is written by a real pastor in a real place to a real congregation going through very real suffering. Then he describes their context. Bell continues, they were living under the oppressive rule of a succession of Roman emperors who demanded they be worshiped as the Son of God. Christians who refused to acknowledge these Caesars as Lord were being executed simply for being followers of Jesus. Well, if that were my reality, I might look for an end of it also. That is exactly the hope that John shared in this letter that we now call the book of Revelation. This is the revealing of Jesus Christ in a time of great difficulty. God has revealed the very essence of Christ to the author, John. Now, to be clear, his audience would not necessarily have heard this message as a literal end to the world. They would have taken this to be a word of confidence for their own future. In the midst of his people's suffering, John encounters an angel of the Lord who arrives to tell him, this torment that you're living through is not my dream for you. This world of pain and fear is not for you. I am for you. The book of Revelation is an invitation to view the world not as it is, but as God dreams of transforming it and us. I have a friend named Greg who has the most beautiful perspective on how God's love can transform us. Greg has been on death row in Ohio for 37 years. I came to know him when I began working with a prison ministry program in the congregation I used to serve. Greg is one of several death row inmates I've started walking alongside in pastoral care, and I share his story with you today only with his permission. To answer the question on your mind, no, I don't know much about Greg's legal case. I have chosen not to ask many questions or to dig too deep because that's not my job. My job is just to provide loving spiritual care to another beloved human. Greg and I exchange emails, and we even talk on the phone from time to time. And in all my conversations with Greg, I have come to learn that he ministers to me far more than I could possibly minister to him. Other guys on the row, as they call it, go to Greg for inspiration. He has always lifted up people with his little sermons and his wisdom. And when he receives a care package from the outside, he shares it with others. And he says this, "God has blessed me with enough of the intangible. I can afford to share summer sausage with the guys." It might be the only joy they experience for a while. That's not where my joy comes from. My joy comes from the Lord. I don't think he would turn down summer sausage, though. A couple of months ago on a call, I asked Greg how he came to the Christian faith, knowing that it didn't happen until he was in prison, as he's told me. Well, someone had given him a Bible, and he has worked his way through it, even though his formal education ended in the 4th grade. It is through these stories of the Bible, stories of struggle and stories of grace, Greg has said, that he has come to have faith in God's redeeming love. Greg proclaims he is innocent of the crime he's been sentenced to death for. So I asked how he reconciles his faith with being accused of something atrocious. He told me that he used to be angry with those who have accused him, but now he forgives them, and he loves them. Then he said something I will never forget. He said to me, "Susan, hate condemned me, and love has set me free." It doesn't matter how many sermons I hear or how many commentaries I read about what it means to be set free spiritually, as we hear in these texts. Nothing will compare to hearing those words from someone on death row. We have 2 New Testament readings today, and it's powerful to look at them in relation to one another. Now, the Gospel of John, which is written by a different John, takes place in the command post of a government official. It's where we encounter a Jesus who has been persecuted, he's being unfairly tried, and he'll soon be shackled and demeaned. And he says to Pilate, "My kingdom is not from this world." Compare it to the other reading, which offers us a Jesus who comes from a place on high, not from this world, finally free from persecution and human pain. On this Reign of Christ Sunday, this is the King we are to be celebrating. But I wonder, do we want a Jesus not of this world? Or do we want one who understands our hardships? Call me greedy, but I want them both. When I was that 17-year-old, with my stomach in knots over an upcoming test, all I wanted was solidarity. I wanted to do well on the test too, but solidarity was really a beautiful thing. And now, with a little more life experience, my perspective extends beyond my personal needs and my individual angst, and I realize everyone who is suffering deserves solidarity and compassion. After all, it has been said that misery loves company, but I think misery would also do well just to meet some relief. Most of us are facing difficulties that are somewhere greater than standardized test preparation, and maybe less worrisome than life on death row with little access to friends or family. No matter where we are on that spectrum, we don't want to be in it alone. We yearn for a hope for something better. It's not lost on me that while we speak of freedom on this Reign of Christ Sunday, we are doing so in the shadow of two major news stories in our cycle of news this week. Each story was about a different individual going through our justice system. One man is Julius Jones, a man in Oklahoma whose death sentence was commuted just hours before he was scheduled to depart this earth. And the other is the story of a man facing charges for taking the lives of protesters in Wisconsin, and he was found not guilty. They are very different people, and these are very different stories. There are issues of race and power and inequity at play. I've wrestled with what to make of it all and how to respond. As a person of faith, I believe in redemption, but my faith also compels me to work for holy justice and to stand with the vulnerable and to reject a false idea that we can fairly take life from one another. Then I came across a litany written by Dr. Sharon Fenema, a professor and theologian who is doing work with our United Church of Christ. She wrote this in response to the events of the week for the occasion of this Reign of Christ Sunday, and I'll share just a portion of this prayer with you. To the one who loves us and frees us, we lift up our prayers that our anger might become sacred fire, that our despair might become hopeful vision, guiding us toward freedom, that our confidence might become humble curiosity, bringing your promised reign closer to us. I still don't know how to make sense of the trauma people inflict upon one another. But there's comfort in realizing God knows the complexities of our world. As a man who was sentenced to death, Jesus has lived it. That is a solidarity that transcends all that is human. But where is this relief? I think it's closer than we realize, because it starts with us. The most hopeful news that I have to share for you today is that God's promise to bring us to a better place is not realized only in our own death or only if or when the world comes to an end. On this day, we celebrate that the divine is here to meet us now. One other word of wisdom Greg has shared with me is this. Sometimes, Susan, you're the first scripture that someone will ever read. Yes. People come to know God through us. Some may never pick up a Bible, but they come to learn about stories of hope born out of despair from us. We look toward one another to realize that Christ lives here now. I see him in my friend Greg, who says these gut-punch, perspective-changing phrases like, people call this death row, but I call it life row, because when I got up this morning, God gave me life. For those of you who are here suffering in any way, I see you. I'm with you. And my prayer for you is that you will feel solidarity in this community and that relief will find you soon. What kind of king is Jesus? He's the one who lives among us and calls us forward to something better. He is the one who invites us to co-create a world in which we empathize about the stress of standardized tests, where we share our summer sausage and proclaim God's goodness in the bleakest of circumstances. And Jesus invites us forward to a kingdom in which, whenever justice occurs on our streets or in our courtrooms, we first cry together. And then we demand more of each other. And we commit to helping one another realize God's dream. That's the revelation. Amen.
Thank you so much, Pastor Susan, for introducing us to your friend Greg. Thank you. And we